What if I told you that one of the greatest expeditions in human history vanished without a single survivor, despite carrying enough technology, supplies, and confidence to conquer the Arctic? In the spring of 1845, 129 of Britain's finest sailors boarded two of the most advanced ships ever built. Their mission seemed simple: discover the last unexplored section of the Northwest Passage and secure everlasting glory for the British Empire. Instead, they disappeared. Years later, rescuers found abandoned camps, skeletons scattered across the frozen wilderness, eerie handwritten notes, empty food tins, and evidence so horrifying that many Victorian officials refused to believe it. For nearly 2 centuries, scientists, historians, and explorers searched for the truth. This is the real story of the Franklin expedition. On the morning of May 19, 1845, crowds gathered along the River Thames to watch 2 magnificent ships slowly drift away from England. The ships were HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Unlike ordinary wooden sailing vessels, these ships represented the very peak of British engineering. Their hulls had been reinforced with thick layers of oak and iron plating designed to survive crushing Arctic ice. Each vessel carried a steam engine salvaged from railway locomotives. For short distances, powerful propellers could push the ships through calm water even when there was little wind. To the public, these ships looked unstoppable. The British Empire was at its peak. Its navy ruled oceans across the world. Its explorers had mapped continents, climbed mountains, and crossed deserts. Only one great mystery remained: the Northwest Passage. For centuries, European nations dreamed of discovering a sea route connecting the Atlantic Ocean directly to the Pacific through northern Canada. Whoever controlled that passage could transform global trade forever. Many expeditions had tried, most had failed. Some vanished without a trace. Now, Britain believed it had assembled the perfect expedition. Its commander was Sir John Franklin. Franklin was 59 years old. His age worried some officers. He was older than many Arctic explorers, yet his experience seemed unmatched. He had spent decades exploring Canada's northern wilderness. He had survived starvation, freezing temperatures, and impossible journeys. Some newspapers proudly called him the man who could not be defeated. His second-in-command, Francis Crozier, possessed even greater Arctic experience. Quiet, intelligent, and deeply respected, Crozier understood the dangers of polar ice better than almost anyone alive. Together, they commanded 129 officers and sailors. Every man volunteered. None were forced. Many believed they were about to make history. Families waved from the shoreline. Children cheered. Bands played patriotic music. No one imagined they would never see these men again. The expedition stopped briefly in Greenland. Here, crew members mailed letters home. These letters remain the last personal messages ever received from most of the expedition. The sailors sounded cheerful. Food was plentiful. Morale remained high. Some joked about returning home as heroes within a couple of years. After leaving Greenland in late July 1845, 2 whaling ships spotted Erebus and Terror sailing confidently into Baffin Bay. The weather appeared favorable. The ships disappeared behind drifting ice. That was the last confirmed sighting. Then, silence. Months passed, then years. No letters arrived, no ships returned, no survivors appeared. At first, nobody panicked. Arctic expeditions often disappeared during winter before returning safely in summer. But by 1847, concern slowly grew. By 1848, the British government faced an uncomfortable reality. Something had gone terribly wrong. Lady Jane Franklin refused to believe her husband had simply vanished. She launched one of history's largest search campaigns. Using both government funding and her own fortune, she pressured Britain to send rescue expedition after rescue expedition into the Arctic. Over the next decade, dozens of ships searched thousands of miles of frozen coastline. These rescue missions became extraordinary adventures themselves. Many nearly ended in disaster.
crews battled freezing temperatures below -40 degrees. Wood cracked apart from intense cold. Metal became brittle. Men suffered frostbite severe enough to lose fingers, toes, even entire feet. Yet no trace of Franklin appeared, until strange stories began reaching European settlements. Inuit hunters described encounters with starving white men dragging heavy sleds across endless ice. The stories sounded unbelievable. British officers dismissed them. They believed disciplined Royal Navy sailors would never abandon their ships. Surely the Inuit had misunderstood. Years later, everyone realized the Inuit had been telling the truth. One rescue expedition eventually discovered a small stone cairn on King William Island. Inside lay one of the most important documents in Arctic history. The message was originally written in May 1847. It reported everything was fine. Franklin commanded both ships. The expedition had spent one winter trapped in ice. No major problems existed. At first glance, this sounded encouraging. But someone later squeezed another message into the margins. This second note changed everything. It revealed Sir John Franklin had died on June 11, 1847. 24 officers and sailors were already dead. The ships had remained trapped in ice for nearly 2 years. On April 22, 1848, the remaining 105 survivors abandoned both vessels. Their new leader was Captain Francis Crozier. Instead of waiting aboard ship, they planned to march south toward the Back River, hoping eventually to reach civilization. Imagine that decision. 105 exhausted men, pulling hundreds of pounds of supplies across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness, without roads, without maps accurate enough to guide them, without certainty anyone would ever find them. Modern survival experts estimate the journey bordered on impossible. Still, they tried. Years later, search teams discovered haunting evidence along their route. Abandoned boats sat mounted on heavy sleds. Inside were strange collections of possessions, silver dinner plates, books, fine clothing, even heavy tableware. These objects made little sense. Every unnecessary pound reduced their chance of survival. Why carry silver instead of food? Why drag books across Arctic ice? Some historians believe these objects represented hope. Perhaps the sailors still believed rescue waited ahead. Perhaps they refused to abandon symbols of civilization. Or perhaps they simply could not accept how desperate their situation had become. Nearby lay human remains. Some rested peacefully. Others appeared to have collapsed while walking. There were no graves, no ceremonies, only frozen silence. The Arctic had preserved their final moments with heartbreaking clarity. As more remains emerged over the following decades, another disturbing mystery appeared. Several bones contained unmistakable cut marks, not animal bites, knife marks. The evidence suggested flesh had been carefully removed after death. Victorian Britain reacted with horror. Cannibalism? Impossible. Royal Navy officers would never. The government publicly rejected the conclusion. Many newspapers attacked anyone suggesting such a thing. They claimed the bones had been damaged naturally. But science continued advancing. Modern forensic analysis eventually confirmed what rescuers had feared. Some members of the Franklin expedition had indeed resorted to cannibalism during their final desperate weeks. Not out of cruelty, not out of savagery, but because starvation had destroyed every other option. Yet starvation alone could not explain everything. Why had such a well-equipped expedition failed so completely? The ships carried enough food for at least 3 years. Thousands of canned meals filled their storage rooms. Flour, salted meat, soup, vegetables, tea, chocolate, alcohol, medical supplies. Everything had been carefully planned, or so everyone believed. Then scientists uncovered another hidden disaster. Many preserved food cans had been sealed using lead-based solder. During hurried manufacturing, large amounts of lead contaminated the food itself. As sailors consumed these meals month after month, lead slowly accumulated inside their bodies. Lead poisoning affects memory, decision-making, mood, coordination. exactly the abilities needed for survival in the Arctic. Hair and bone samples recovered from Franklin crew members later revealed dangerously elevated lead levels. Although researchers still debate how significant this poisoning was, few doubt it made an already impossible situation even worse. Then there was the ice. Modern satellite observations have shown that the Franklin expedition encountered one of the harshest Arctic ice periods in decades. The pack ice simply refused to move. Season after season, the ships remained imprisoned. No amount of steam power could free them. The Arctic had become an enormous frozen prison. For years, nobody knew exactly where Erebus and Terror had ended their journey. Many believed they had sunk beneath deep water forever. Then, in 2014, after generations of searching, a Canadian expedition made an astonishing discovery.
In September 2014, after nearly 170 years of unanswered questions, the Arctic finally surrendered one of its greatest secrets. For generations, explorers had searched with little more than faded maps, scattered Inuit testimony, and hope. Entire expeditions had come and gone without finding the lost ships. Some believed Erebus and Terror had been crushed beneath the ice. Others thought they had drifted into waters no one would ever reach. Then, a Canadian search team using modern sonar technology in the icy waters of Queen Maud Gulf detected an unmistakable shape resting on the seabed. Divers descended through the freezing darkness. As their lights pierced the cold water, a massive wooden hull slowly emerged from the shadows. It was HMS Erebus. The ship had been lying silently beneath the Arctic for more than 150 years. Unlike the shattered wreck many expected, Erebus appeared astonishingly well preserved. Its massive timbers still stood strong. The deck remained largely intact. Cabin windows could still be recognized. Cannons rested where sailors had left them. Doors remained closed, protecting rooms that no human eyes had seen since the 19th century. The freezing Arctic water had acted like a giant natural museum. Marine bacteria that normally destroy wooden shipwrecks could not survive in such extreme conditions. Every dive revealed another remarkable piece of history. China plates remained stacked inside cabinets. Glass bottles stood upright on shelves. Navigation instruments lay where officers had once used them. Personal belongings rested exactly as they had been abandoned. It felt less like exploring a shipwreck and more like stepping into a perfectly preserved moment, frozen in time. Yet one mystery remained. Where was Terror? 2 years later, in 2016, another astonishing discovery stunned historians. An Inuit ranger named Sami Kogvik shared stories passed down through local families. They spoke of a ship resting in a remote bay. Researchers investigated. The stories proved correct. HMS Terror had been found. Even more remarkably, Terror appeared to be in even better condition than Erebus. Its masts had collapsed over time, but much of the vessel remained sealed. Some cabin doors were still shut. Windows remained in place. Researchers believed furniture, journals, clothing, and countless artifacts might still survive inside. For historians, it was the equivalent of discovering an untouched Egyptian tomb beneath the sea. Each artifact answered one question while creating 5 more. Why had the ships ended up miles apart? Did one drift after being abandoned? Did some sailors return aboard after leaving? Could anyone have survived longer than previously believed? Divers recovered hundreds of objects: buttons from naval uniforms, pieces of rope, cooking utensils, medical equipment, navigation tools, wooden writing desks, ceramic dishes. Every object whispered a small fragment of a much larger story.
One discovery fascinated researchers more than almost anything else: the captain's pantry. Inside, shelves still contained plates, bowls, bottles, and storage containers. Everything looked as though someone might return at any moment. It reminded everyone that these were not merely explorers, they were ordinary human beings. They laughed together, shared meals, wrote letters, celebrated birthdays, dreamed about returning home. None of them knew they were living the final chapter of their lives. Modern science soon transformed the investigation. Forensic anthropologists carefully examined every bone recovered across King William Island. Using microscopic analysis, they identified evidence of starvation, severe vitamin deficiencies, repeated physical exhaustion, broken bones that had partially healed, cut marks consistent with desperate attempts to remove every remaining piece of edible tissue. The conclusions were heartbreaking. The Franklin expedition had not ended in one catastrophic event. It had unfolded as a slow, relentless tragedy lasting years. Winter after winter, hope disappeared one day at a time. Researchers also analyzed preserved fingernails, hair, and teeth. These samples confirmed unusually high concentrations of lead. For decades, historians believed poorly sealed food cans were the primary source. More recent studies suggested another possibility. The ships themselves carried sophisticated freshwater systems that used lead pipes. Whenever drinking water passed through these pipes, small amounts of lead entered the crew's bodies. Whether the contamination came mostly from food, plumbing, or both remains debated. But almost every expert agrees the men were exposed to dangerous levels over long periods. Lead poisoning alone did not kill the expedition. The Arctic did. But lead almost certainly weakened their ability to make critical decisions under impossible conditions. Climate researchers added another important piece to the puzzle. Ice core samples and historical weather records revealed that the expedition entered the Arctic during an unusually cold period. Sea ice formed earlier, it melted later. Massive floating pressure ridges trapped ships that might otherwise have escaped. Modern icebreakers equipped with satellite navigation would struggle under similar conditions. Franklin's wooden ships never stood a chance. The greatest irony was impossible to ignore. The expedition had carried enough technology to impress the world: steam engines, internal heating systems, reinforced hulls, thousands of carefully packed supplies. Yet nature rendered every innovation almost meaningless. The Arctic did not care about engineering. It demanded humility. Throughout the 20th century, public opinion slowly changed. Victorian Britain had celebrated Franklin as a flawless hero while refusing to discuss uncomfortable evidence. Modern historians painted a more human picture. Franklin was brave, dedicated, experienced, but he was also leading an expedition into one of the harshest environments on Earth, with limited knowledge and overwhelming confidence. His men were not failures. They were victims of conditions almost impossible to overcome. Inuit perspective proved equally important. For generations, Inuit families had preserved oral histories describing starving Europeans dragging boats across the ice, collapsing from exhaustion, and dying along the shoreline. Many 19th century officials dismissed these accounts because they did not fit European assumptions. Modern archaeology repeatedly confirmed that Inuit witnesses had been astonishingly accurate. Their observations helped locate campsites, artifacts, human remains, even the final resting places of the ships themselves. It became one of history's clearest reminders that indigenous knowledge deserves respect alongside scientific investigation. Today, the wrecks of Erebus and Terror are protected underwater archaeological sites. Only carefully supervised scientific expeditions may enter them. Every recovered artifact is conserved with extraordinary care because even a simple wooden spoon can reveal valuable information about life aboard the ships. Researchers continue mapping every cabin, every corridor, every storage compartment. Some rooms remain unexplored because opening them requires years of careful planning. The hope that an intact journal might still survive continues to inspire every expedition. Imagine finding the final diary written during those last desperate weeks. Imagine reading the thoughts of officers who knew rescue would never come. Perhaps somewhere beneath layers of Arctic silt lies the final written account of humanity's greatest polar mystery. Whether that journal still exists remains unknown, but even without it, the Franklin expedition changed history forever. The tragedy inspired improvements in Arctic exploration. Future expeditions carried better preserved food, more practical survival equipment, greater respect for local indigenous expertise, improved understanding of nutrition, safer ship construction. The sacrifices of 129 men ultimately helped future explorers survive where they could not. Their story also transformed how historians understand exploration itself. For centuries, exploration had often been presented as a tale of fearless heroes conquering nature. Franklin's expedition revealed a different truth. Nature cannot always be conquered. Sometimes survival depends not on courage alone, but on adaptability, humility, and the willingness to learn from those who know the land best. Standing today on the silent shores of King William Island, the Arctic appears peaceful. Snow stretches endlessly toward the horizon. The sea freezes into a brilliant white plain. The wind carries only silence. Yet beneath that silence rests one of humanity's most unforgettable stories. 129 men sailed into the unknown, believing they were about to make history. In the end, they did, just not in the way anyone imagined. Their names are carved into memorials thousands of miles away. Their ships rest beneath dark Arctic waters. Their mystery challenged generations of explorers, scientists, archaeologists, and historians. And even now, nearly 2 centuries later, the Franklin expedition continues to remind the world that the greatest adventures are often remembered not because they succeeded, but because they revealed the extraordinary limits of human ambition.
Long after the last sailor took his final breath, long after the ships disappeared beneath the frozen sea, and long after the British Empire itself faded into history, the Arctic kept their story alive. Every drifting iceberg, every frozen shoreline, every recovered artifact, every silent cabin beneath the water. Together, they tell the same unforgettable message. Some mysteries are solved not by a single discovery, but by generations refusing to stop searching. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the Franklin expedition. Not simply the tragedy of how 129 men were lost, but the enduring determination of humanity to seek answers, no matter how many years, how many miles, or how much ice stands in the way.